the beginning, it was a mess. But when we managed to get this away, to clean out the samples, we got really pure DNA to manage to tell something about him, and especially about his ancestry.
It is possible that the ancient astronauts taught the Egyptians that mummification was a way of preserving their genetic information in the DNA.
King Tutankhamun's golden mask captured the world's imagination, but the real treasure was never gold. It was hidden in his blood. After more than 3,000 years, scientists have decoded his DNA and exposed a shocking truth that changes everything we thought we knew about Tut and his dynasty. King Tut's tomb, the discovery that stunned the world.
His lips, his nose, it's well detailed.
This coffin is an extraordinary, one-of-a-kind find.
Tutankhamun wasn't supposed to be the star of ancient Egypt. His reign was short, his monuments were modest, and his memory had almost slipped away. But when his tomb came back into the light in the fall of 1922, the boy king stunned the world. British archaeologist Howard Carter had spent years digging in the Valley of the Kings on money borrowed from his patron, Lord Carnarvon, and he was nearly out of time. This was the final season before funding dried up.
Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon both thought that actually they hadn't found the tomb of Tutankhamun.
Then on November 4th, an Egyptian workman's tool scraped the top of a carved step. Carter cleared it, then another and another, 16 in all, descending to a sealed doorway stamped with the necropolis seal of a jackal over 9 captives. Carter reburied the find, sent a telegram to Carnarvon that read, "At last have made wonderful discovery," and waited. 3 weeks later, Carnarvon and his daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert, arrived in Luxor. Over the next 3 days, the crew exposed the whole flight and the sealed door behind it. On November 26th, Carter made a tiny breach, raised a candle to the hole, and peered inside. When Carnarvon asked if he could see anything, Carter spoke the line that still echoes a century later. Yes, wonderful things. What they had found was KV-62, a surprisingly small royal tomb with just 4 chambers. A short corridor, an antechamber, an annex, a burial chamber, and a side room known as the treasury. Unlike most royal tombs, the walls were mostly bare rock, with decoration only in the burial chamber itself.
An insight into his state of mind, his excitement. For years, he'd dreamt of this moment. This could be the climax of his career.
But the lack of paint was made up for in scale. The rooms were crammed with treasure. 5,398 catalogued objects ranging from simple linen shirts to massive golden shrines taller than a man. The excavation became a 10-year marathon. Nothing was touched until Harry Burton, the Metropolitan Museum's photographer, captured it on glass plates. He took about 1,400 photographs, each one turning the chaos of the tomb into a permanent record. The first chamber Carter stepped into was overwhelming. The antechamber was so crowded that furniture leaned against ritual couches shaped like animals. 4 disassembled chariots were stacked in a corner, and walking sticks, bows, and boxes covered nearly every bit of floor. At the north end stood 2 nearly life-size black statues of the king, each wearing a golden headdress and kilt, guarding a sealed partition. In the flicker of candlelight, their gold inlays glowed against the dark wood. Beyond that wall lay the burial chamber. Inside, 4 gilded shrines fit so tightly that only slivers of space remained, about 26 inches at the ends and 14 at the sides. At the center rested a quartzite sarcophagus with a granite lid. Within it were 3 nested coffins, the last made of solid gold. That inner coffin weighed about 243 pounds.
Once in a lifetime kind of chance to see this.
The last time these treasures were together was inside Tutankhamun's tomb.
Resting above all was the single most famous relic of ancient Egypt, the golden mask of Tutankhamun. It weighed 22.5 pounds, inlaid with lapis lazuli, quartz, and colored glass. Its calm, youthful face, striped headdress, and twin emblems of cobra and vulture became the icon of Egypt overnight.
It's inlaid with thousands of fragments of colored glass and semi-precious stones.
But the treasures weren't just about wealth. They preserved the mood of a funeral. Garlands of cornflowers, lotus petals, and olive leaves, some 6 feet long, still lay where mourners placed them. A small wreath had been set on the cobra and vulture emblems of the coffin, though the flowers had browned with age. Burton's photos froze them in time. Signs of trouble appeared early, though. The first doorway showed robber holes, ancient break-ins that had been plastered shut. The entrance corridor was tightly packed with limestone chips, some carrying objects swept in from looters. Back in 1907, Carter had already found KV-54, a pit filled with scraps from Tut's embalming and funeral feast. Evidence that after robbers struck, officials patched the tomb and reburied debris elsewhere. Inside KV-62, everything was fragile and stacked awkwardly. One wrong move could snap gilded chair legs or crush baskets of fruit. That is why Burton's camera came first, Carter's careful hands second. While Carter's crew worked, the outside world spun into a frenzy. Carnarvon sold exclusive story rights to the Times of London, locking out other reporters who scrambled for scraps and rumors. When Carnarvon died in Cairo on April 5, 1923, from an infected mosquito bite he nicked while shaving, newspapers everywhere screamed of a pharaoh's curse. There was no curse text carved on the door, but the myth spread faster than any sober talk of infection and bacteria. Inside, Carter and his team turned archaeology into a precision operation. With electric lights strung through the tomb, they sketched, logged, and photographed every item in place. Then again after numbering and again after removal. For them, it was both a rescue mission and a documentary project.
Incredible work that it entailed to get this stuff out.
The layout of the tomb raised questions. KV-62 was shallow and compact, closer to the tomb of a noble than a grand pharaoh. Only the burial chamber carried paintings. The shrines were crammed into a space barely big enough to contain them. The corridor showed replastering after ancient robberies. Some equipment seemed repurposed to meet a deadline. All of it hinted at a funeral rushed under pressure, rather than a carefully prepared royal resting place. Yet those cramped chambers gave modern audiences something that no other tomb had offered. The arrangement of a royal burial left as mourners had placed it.
In contrast to the tomb of Tutankhamun is that in all aspects, this tomb is just grander, it's bigger.
Chariots showed signs of wear. Chairs still had cushions. Sandals lay ready to wear. Boxes of meat and fruit sat labeled in jars. These were not props. They were the personal belongings of a young king, frozen in time. Instead of scattered artifacts looted centuries earlier, the world got to see an almost intact pharaoh's burial, human and real. Still, hard questions pressed in. Why would a king be laid to rest in such a small tomb? Why was decoration so limited? And most of all, why did a king barely past his teens need a funeral in the first place? Those mysteries pulled eyes away from the treasure and toward the boy himself, and eventually to the DNA in his bones, where the ancestry that shaped his fate waited in silence. The truth about King Tut's death. King Tut's golden mask had already captured the world, but the body beneath it carried questions that would echo for decades.
Egyptians should have been mummified like this, let alone an Egyptian pharaoh.
Early on, whispers spread that the back of his skull looked damaged, and almost instantly people began to murmur about murder. It was a juicy story, a young pharaoh taken down by betrayal, but the truth was far less sensational and much more complicated. When Howard Carter's team reached the mummy in 1925, they faced a brutal problem. The ancient embalmers had poured resin over the body, and over the centuries it hardened like glue. The corpse had fused to the coffin and to the famous mask. Carter's crew had no modern equipment, no scanners, no way to separate the pieces safely. So they turned to heat and sharp tools, trying to free the remains by force. In the process, they cracked bones, split the body into sections, and left it badly damaged. Later, researchers would find small bone fragments inside the skull, but they weren't from a brutal blow. They were the result of resin pooling into the head and rough handling during the 1920s. That story didn't end in the 20s.
Some people think this is due to a blow to the head. Other people think it was an accident during the embalming process, something that occurred even later than that.
In 2005, a mobile CT scanner rolled into Luxor and transformed the investigation. For the first time, doctors could examine Tutankhamun from head to toe without laying a finger on him. They took over 1,000 digital slices of his skeleton. The scans were crystal clear. There was no skull fracture that matched a fatal injury. The fragments in the head were exactly what Carter's notes described: resin and excavation damage. But the left thigh bone told another story.
Radiologist Professor Ashraf Salim is about to conduct the first ever virtual post-mortem of King Tutankhamun.
Just above the knee, the femur showed a serious break. Even more telling, embalming resin had seeped into the fracture. That detail means the injury was open when the body was being prepared. In a world with no antibiotics, a wound like that could lead to rapid infection or blood clots. Suddenly, the cause of death wasn't a secret murder, but a medical crisis. A shattered leg that could have killed a 19-year-old pharaoh quickly. So how did the legend of a chariot crash rise up? For decades, it seemed like the perfect fit. A young king, living fast, racing chariots through the desert. Then one accident, and it was all over. In 2013, a television investigation even staged crash simulations. They claimed a high-speed impact could explain his injuries. It was dramatic, and it sold headlines. But the scans never fully matched that tale.
can see that the mummy is in a very bad state. The whole body is cut into pieces.
Later reviews showed that the expected damage from such a crash wasn't there. Even more, CT results revealed Tutankhamun likely struggled just to walk. Racing chariots at high speed would have been nearly impossible for him. The glamorous crash theory faded away, leaving behind a more sobering picture. That picture grew sharper when doctors looked at his foot. The CT scans showed signs of a vascular necrosis, a condition where bone loses its blood supply and slowly dies. In young people, it often strikes the forefoot, a condition sometimes called Kuhler disease too. It causes pain, warps the way a person walks, and can make every step feel like torture. Suddenly, the collection of over 130 canes in the tomb made sense. Kings loved ceremonial staffs, sure, but no royal burial had ever included that many. The sheer number, plain canes, carved sticks, and decorated staves, points to a young man who leaned on them in daily life, not just in ritual. Even scholars who argue about symbolism admit it looks like he needed them. Imagine that. A boy king with every luxury but unable to walk comfortably, leaning on sticks for balance. Every step would have felt like driving a nail into his foot. He likely shifted his weight to the outer edge, awkwardly rolling his stride, and the CT scans back it up. Add to that a sudden violent leg fracture near the time of his death, and the picture darkens. His body was already vulnerable, already working around pain, when the brake pushed him past the edge. You don't need a dramatic crash to explain it. There was one more player in this tragedy: disease. In 2010, researchers ran DNA tests on tissue samples from several royal mummies, searching for traces of parasites. Tutankhamun tested positive for malaria, the deadliest strain, Plasmodium falciparum. This parasite attacks the blood, destroys red cells, and can leave a person weak and fevered. In someone already struggling with bone disease and a serious leg wound, malaria would have been devastating. It could have tipped his body into septic shock or stripped him of the strength to fight infection. Put those pieces together: a bad foot, a broken thigh, and malaria coursing through his veins. In a time with no modern drugs, the outcome becomes painfully clear. And yet, one question lingers. Why did so many problems strike one teenager? Why did his skeleton show disorders that rarely pile up in one body? To understand why his body carried so many burdens, you have to look at the dynasty that produced him and the genetic risks that came with it.
CT solved the mystery. He was not murdered by a blow to the head.
How Egypt tried to hide Tut's family. When people talk about the strangest twist in all of ancient Egypt, they usually land on one moment: the Amarna years. This was when a pharaoh named Amenhotep IV decided that the old system was broken. He didn't just tweak a few rules, he tore the whole thing down. He even changed his own name to Akhenaten, which means effective for the Aten, and shoved one god, the Aten, the blazing sun disk, right to the top of Egypt's religion. For centuries, Egypt had balanced dozens of gods, with Amun leading the pack. Suddenly, all of that was brushed aside in favor of one shining circle in the sky, and Akhenaten didn't stop there. He packed up the royal court and built a brand new city from scratch out in the desert. Imagine the scale of that move, taking the heart of government out of Thebes, the old power center, and planting it in empty sand. He carved huge boundary markers into the cliffs around the site, spelling out the city's limits for everyone to see. In those texts, dated to the 5th year of his reign, he declared, "This is the place." The city's name, Akhetaten, meant Horizon of the Aten, and today we call the site Tel El Amarna. This was more than architecture. It was a cultural earthquake. The temples that had fed priests, workers, and entire towns for generations suddenly lost their income and status. The old religious machine, which had kept society stable for centuries, was gutted. In its place stood one god and one king, both demanding absolute loyalty. But as dramatic as that was, the story didn't end with Akhenaten. After his death, Egypt snapped back hard. The person who inherited the throne was just a boy, Tutankhamun. His very name declared him as the living image of Aten. But early in his reign, he changed it to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. His young queen did the same, shifting from Ankhesenpaten to Ankhesenamun. It was a public U-turn, a loud announcement that the old gods were back. The government shifted north to Memphis in Lower Egypt, where political life could run closer to the trade routes and delta traffic, while Thebes once again became the spiritual center. This return to tradition is carved into a massive inscription known as the Restoration Stela, dated to the 4th year of Tutankhamun's reign.
So a little backstory about this stela, which makes it very important to academics, is that it's called the Restoration Stela of Tutankhamun. So this is the 1st year of the reign
The text is dramatic, painting a bleak picture of Egypt under Akhenaten. It claims temples had crumbled, sanctuaries were abandoned, and the gods had turned their backs. The stela promises to rebuild shrines, rehire priests, restart festivals, and restore offerings. It reads like propaganda, but propaganda with a mission. A teenage king saying, "We're fixing this mess. We're making Egypt whole again." That message was powerful enough that later rulers even reused it. Still, beneath the public face of restoration, Tutankhamun's throne wobbled. Deep inside his tomb, in the treasury room, Howard Carter's team made a heartbreaking discovery. 2 tiny coffins holding the mummified remains of baby girls.
These 2 baby mummies were laid to rest with their father in the tomb of Tutankhamun.
They were placed together in a wooden box, one laid with the head at one end, and the other with the head at the opposite end. Their wrappings still carried the seals from the royal necropolis. Nearby sat another coffin, containing a lock of Queen Tia's hair. She was the powerful grandmother of Tutankhamun and the great royal wife of Amenhotep III. Later medical imaging showed one fetus had reached about 25 weeks of gestation, while the other was nearly full term, around 37 weeks. The meaning was plain and tragic. Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun had lost 2 daughters before birth. There was no surviving child, no heir waiting. In a culture that valued smooth succession from father to son, this was a serious problem. That problem became even clearer after Tutankhamun's death. His widow found herself trapped in a dangerous political storm. And it was then that one of the strangest letters in ancient history was written. In the archives of the Hittite Empire, archaeologists found a clay tablet recording a desperate message. A queen of Egypt, her title scribbled phonetically as Dakamunzu, meaning simply the king's wife, wrote to the Hittite king Suppiluliuma I. She said her husband had died, she had no son, and she begged him to send one of his sons to marry her and rule Egypt. Think about how radical that was. An Egyptian queen, reaching outside the Nile Valley, asking a foreign power to send her a prince to take Egypt's throne. That had never happened before. Suppiluliuma agreed and sent his son Zananza, but Zananza never made it. He was killed on the way, and the plan collapsed in blood and suspicion. Scholars still debate which queen wrote the letter, but most agree it was Ankhesenamun. The timing lines up, and no other widow of that moment makes sense. The letter shows just how fragile the dynasty had become. If there had been a clear Egyptian heir, no queen would risk inviting a foreigner. The fact that a Hittite prince even got close to Egypt's borders shows how desperate things were. In the end, the throne fell not to a royal son, but to A, the senior courtier, and then to Horemheb, a general. That's the line we see in later king lists, but the messy scramble behind it shows how unstable Egypt really was after Tutankhamun's short reign. And this instability feeds the bigger question: who exactly were Tutankhamun's parents? Why was the royal line so brittle? The answer isn't easy to read off a wall or a statue, because those walls and statues were literally defaced. After Amarna, rulers like Horemheb wanted to erase the entire episode. They reused blocks from Akhenaten's temples as filler for new buildings. They chiseled out names, rewrote inscriptions, and presented themselves as the rightful heirs of Amenhotep III, skipping over the heretic pharaoh and his line. What we're left with is history full of holes and edits. Was Akhenaten the mysterious body found in KV 55? Was Tutankhamun's mother one of Akhenaten's sisters, or his famous wife Nefertiti? With so many names later erased, it became almost impossible to know, and for decades, scholars could only argue and debate without clear answers. Then came the breakthrough. In the early 2000s, Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities launched the Egyptian Mummy Project, a bold plan to use modern genetics to cut through the confusion. The idea wasn't just to satisfy curiosity. It was to map out the royal family of the late 18th dynasty, to connect parents, children, and siblings with scientific certainty. This wasn't amateur work. The project used strict rules to prevent contamination. Samples were taken only from solid bone or well-preserved tissue, with surfaces cleaned by chemicals and ultraviolet light. Tools were new for each sample. Staff wore masks and gloves, and their own DNA profiles were logged to spot contamination. Each test site was documented and photographed. CT scans of the mummies, guided sampling, and added medical insight. The team didn't test just anyone. They focused on 16 individuals with the best chance of clarifying Tutankhamun's family. That meant Tutankhamun himself from tomb Kavai 62, the controversial male from Kavai 55, the elder lady and younger lady from Kavai 35, Amenhotep III and his queen Taye, and Taye's parents Yuya and Thuya, who were astonishingly well preserved. The study also included the 2 fetuses from Tutankhamun's tomb. the 2 women from Cave 21 who might connect to the royal nursery, and others who could anchor the family tree. The DNA markers chosen were short tandem repeats, little repeating stretches of DNA that make each person's genetic fingerprint unique. The team tested both autosomal markers, which come from both parents, and Y chromosome markers, which follow the male line. Every result was repeated and cross-checked in the second lab. Negative controls were run constantly to make sure no modern DNA crept in. The players were chosen, the samples secured, and the protocols locked tight. What came next wasn't speculation. It was the raw verdict of genetics. The family secret hidden in Tut's DNA. The DNA tests finally cut through a century of arguments and wild guesses. One laboratory was set up inside the Egyptian Museum, and another independent laboratory worked out of Cairo University. From that effort came a 5-generation family tree drawn with science, not hunches. And the conclusion was as clear as it was shocking. The male body from tomb K555 turned out to be Tutankhamun's father. The younger lady from K535 turned out to be his mother. And the twist: those 2 weren't just a couple, they were full brother and sister, both children of Amenhotep III and Queen Tai. To understand why this was such a bombshell, you need to know the players. KV-55 is a small, puzzling burial discovered back in 1907. The coffin was hacked up in antiquity, with the names literally chiseled away, which left generations of Egyptologists arguing about who was inside. The 2010 DNA work tied the KV-55 male directly to Amenhotep III as his son, and directly to Tutankhamun as his father. That narrows the options to 2 princes, Akhenaten or Smenkhkare, both of whom belong to the same inner family circle. Some experts see the bones as belonging to a man in his mid-30s to mid-40s and are comfortable with Akhenaten. Others think the age is younger and lean towards Smenkhkare. But genetically, no matter what name you prefer, he was Tut's father and Tia's son, now to the mother. The younger lady is a female mummy found in KV-35 in 1898 by Victor Lorette. She was lying close to her own mother, Queen Tai. The DNA team identified her as another daughter of Amenhotep III and Tai, and crucially, as Tutankhamun's mother. That locked the picture in place. His parents were full siblings. The genetic software the team used spit out probabilities that were off the charts, practically a string of 9s across the page. In other words, as close to certain as ancient DNA can get. But not everyone was convinced right away. Ancient DNA is notoriously fragile, and Egypt is one of the toughest environments of all. Heat, humidity, and embalming resins all work together to chew up genetic strands. Skeptics worried that what the team found might just be contamination. The scientists anticipated that challenge, which is why they built in safeguards from the start. They ran the work in 2 separate laboratories, logged the DNA of every single worker, and repeated their tests multiple times. Later, in 2017, new research confirmed what they had already shown. Authentic ancient DNA can, in fact, survive in Egyptian mummies if handled carefully. That extra layer of proof only boosted confidence that the results published in 2010 were the real thing. And that brings the story back to Tutankhamun himself. And that's where the story circles back to the body we know so well from his tomb. Close kin marriages raise the risk of recessive problems, the kind of conditions that only appear when both parents carry the same hidden gene.
An upcoming BBC documentary, and shows evidence he was the product of an incestuous relationship.
The research team didn't claim one single diagnosis for Tut. Instead, they connected the pieces already sitting on the table. His skeleton showed bone problems and foot deformities. His tomb contained an unusual number of canes, not just ceremonial props, but many worn smooth from real use.
Inside the tomb, Howard Carter found 6 chariots.
On top of that, DNA tests found traces of malaria parasites, the deadliest kind, in Tut and in some of his relatives.
Researchers believe King Tut died from malaria at the age of 19 and lived his life with choler disease.
Put it together, and you get a young man with fragile legs, a heavy reliance on walking sticks, and a dangerous infection running through his body. Inbreeding doesn't cause malaria, of course, but it can make the body weaker, less able to fight off disease, and more prone to structural problems. Add a major injury or an infection, and suddenly a teenage king is fighting battles inside his own body that he can't win. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.